thanks for everyone to having come back from lunch. Hopefully you're all very much energized and caffeinated, ready for the afternoon program. So, Laurel, thank you to you as well for being here and chatting.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And chatting. So we do have a big brief, don't we? So we need to talk about the big transition. There's lots to tackle. And we were saying that actually looking at the background here, it does feel like we are already on a massive global stage, as if we were already a COP.
Yes, it's interesting that the transition that we're seeing even in this conference focus.
Right, yes. So COP, just a few days ahead, everyone is looking at whether at the end of it, we're actually going to potentially finally have, really with grabbing that word with much uncertainty. But potentially, everyone is hoping to get some commitment around the phase out of fossil fuels. So not the phase down, but phasing out. And of course, I know that Canada is also expected to announce next year its plans for that phase out. At the same time, of course, Canada also relies on fossil fuels. It's a big producer, exporter, and that perhaps points to one of the biggest trade-offs and the biggest critical points in dealing with the transition. So how do you square the need to get to net zero with the transition away from fossil fuels, particularly for economies that heavily rely on it? And I guess that's part of your role, so trying to attract capital to those activities that actually promote the transition. So let's start with that. How challenging is it to actually square the net zero goals with the reality of fossil fuels and the big interest behind fossil fuels?
Well, there's no doubt that we would deceive ourselves if we thought this transition was going to be easy. But at Invest in Canada, an organization that I've been privileged to lead for just over a year now, our job is to talk to global CEOs and talk about the opportunities in Canada and why you might look to Canada. And so you're absolutely right. Canada has a very strong history in a lot of industries, agriculture, energy, as two examples, the automotive and the manufacturing sector. And I think one of the things that has been critical is to look at those current day industries and reimagine them for the future. What will they look like in the future? And so specifically on energy, I grew up in Western Canada. I was born in a place called Weyburn, Saskatchewan, which had one of the very first carbon capture and storage facilities ever. And so I would use that as an example. CCUS is an area that Canada has worked significantly on, and that would be an example of the reimagining of that energy sector. We're reimagining the auto sector as well now as we work to secure batteries and the battery supply chain. We're looking at Canada's expertise in agriculture and have recently seen Rocket, as an example, come to Canada to manufacture alternative proteins. So those, I think, are the pieces. As we head to COP, which I'll head to in a couple of days, I haven't been to COP in 18 years. Depending on your portfolio and your role as a cabinet minister, I went when I was Minister of Environment 18 years ago. And what I would say that I expect to see is significant involvement from the private sector. By all accounts, by all the meetings that I have on my agenda and the people that I've been talking to, we will see a reflection of industry's involvement in the climate change agenda in a positive, transformative way. I hope that's what I see at COP. I hope that that's what I see bear out at COP when I come back 18 years from the last time I was there.
Okay, so we'll love to hear your thoughts after that. So how challenging is it, you mentioned carbon capture and storage, to attract capital, foreign capital, to those projects in Canada or any other projects in Canada when the technology is still evolving and it still needs quite a lot of support and some argue perhaps even public sector support. So what are the solutions that can be put together to really attract private capital, and is it a matter of just lowering risk for those private sector investors, or is it something else, perhaps they're just to attract it towards other investments that give better returns, such as oil and gas?
So I think that you need to, when investing in Canada, we look at kind of providing almost a concierge service to a company in terms of who do you need to meet in government? Will you have regulatory issues you need to better understand? All of those pieces. And I think when you're looking at in driving the transformative change that we are seeking to drive around the world in a number of industries, you have to have the same approach. You have to say who needs to be at the table to have this conversation. So I would use an example of a company that we were recently really thrilled to see them make an investment in Canada, Northvolt out of Sweden, coming to be part of our battery movement. The greenest battery that we will be seeing. One of the roles that we played and others played, though, was bringing other partners to the table, some of the pension funds, some other financial contributors. So I think, listen, these are massive investments that are needing to be made, massive investments that governments alone cannot bear, and neither would we expect. But private sector also needs some support, and so we know that the Inflation Reduction Act was put in place in the U.S., and I think I talked about that from this stage last year, that what we were able to do as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act was bring attention to North American opportunities. And Canada stepped forward to provide support and incentive to bridge some of that gap for the establishment of new facilities, of new supply chains, of everything that needs to be constructed as we transition, for example, our automotive industry to a new electric industry. So those pieces, I think, are the consumer is driving them, the shareholder is driving them, regulation is driving them. It's kind of a comprehensive approach, both on the financial support and on all the pieces needed to see that transition come into place.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about regulation and policy making. So clearly the Inflation Reduction Act, huge impetus behind green investments, and that also prompted other jurisdictions, you mentioned Canada, of course, the EU as well, to respond in a similar way. So tax breaks, support in that sense, funding support essentially in that sense. What about other parts of policy making regulation that can help, such as, for example, the carbon markets, compliance carbon markets, and working towards achieving a high enough and hopefully universally accepted carbon price?
So given that I'm not in government anymore, I can't really talk about what government in Canada would do. But what I would say, again, I do think that I've been such a proponent over my career, whether it's in government or in private sector or now in this role, to say that you need everyone at the table who needs to be part of the solution. And so I guess I would go back to, there's no doubt that regulation is part of this solution. There is no doubt that global approaches to how we are going to account for our carbon footprint. In 2005, when I was a brand new Minister of Environment, that was a very new conversation. When you talk to the auto sector or you talk to industry about your carbon footprint and how we needed to tackle this, that was not known. That is known now. Companies are having those conversations, and they're having those conversations fully on Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And now as we think about Scope 3, that's going to drive changes in the supply chain. So that's a key example of shedding the light on it, talking about it, in combination with regulation, and putting a price on carbon. I wrote a report many, many years ago talking about all this is the basic accounting principle of externalities. Since when would you think that it's acceptable to dump pollution into the ocean and say, oh, well, I didn't do that, that's somebody else going to clean it up. So really fully embracing the externalities need to be part of your financial assessment of your own industry and your impact of your industry. I think that has been really absorbed around the world, and that's what I'm excited about as we see movement in that. And then the other key piece has to be private sector innovators, because government regulation, it's a stick, but it doesn't come up with the new solution of how we're going to deal with it. So, that is where that piece of where you need society to believe that we need to take action. You need innovators and industry to find the solutions, and you need government to play their part, both establishing the construct and the regulation, sort of the push and the pull. So hopefully we're seeing that come into effect. And, if I think back to 2005, the last time I was at COP, if I would have talked to somebody on their doorstep about climate change and why we needed to tackle it, it really wasn't part of, even in a very progressive society in Canada, as part of our daily life that we were thinking about it. We were thinking more about air pollution. And so at the time I was minister, we closed down our coal plants in Ontario. And that was really the single largest CO2 reduction action that a government took in North America. Closing those plants had a significant impact. But the impetus for closing them was really started by air pollution and particulate and childhood asthma. So I think as in the world, unfortunately, we've also started to see the impact of climate change in our daily lives, and that drives consumer and shareholder perspective, and I think that drives the perspective of industrial leaders and business leaders who need to be part of the solution and feel their company needs to be part of the solution.
So are you feeling this change in mood right now in Canada because of the wide effects of climate change?
I think we've been seeing them for a period of time. If you think about ESG, that was, again, a very new conversation, more a decade ago or so. Now it is very much part of, environmental, social governance reports by a variety of companies around the world who really take to heart and are pushing that industrial change. And if they're taking the time to come to COP next week, there, I believe, is action behind their words. It's not words, it's action as well.
Okay, so there is a progressive change, I guess, and the hope is that that change will accelerate. Now, so we talked about regulation, disclosure, scope 1, 2, 3, 4 now as well. We are tackling those. Is greater transparency actually going to help? What are the companies, for example, the companies that you're trying to attract to Canada? Does transparency in this sense, sustainability around ESG data, make a difference to them?
Well, I think from Canada's perspective, the fact that we have significant green electricity is something that we talk about with companies. And so when they think about where they want to set a facility up to make, a new battery, for example, or some product that is viewed as positive for the environment, they need to look at a location that energy supply to create that product is also green. And so I think that all of those elements, when you're looking at all your carbon inputs and tracing it back out, you can't be generating electricity from coal, as still continues to happen in many jurisdictions, in particular in the U.S., I would say. So that, I think, is a driver for us. I mean, I get to sell the value proposition of Canada every day, and we have, strong regulations, strong environmental footprints, we have green electricity, we have great people, and all of those pieces are part of it because this will be a constant evolution, right? The first electric vehicle is not likely the version of an electric vehicle that we will drive sometime in the future. So you need that R&D, research, innovation capacity in your community. And it also affects a lot more pieces of supply chain than you would think. For example, electric vehicles need different tires. So Michelin here in France has made significant investments in Canada to modernize and their facilities for electric vehicle tire manufacturing, which might not be top of mind for someone when they're thinking about what are the changes that are coming as a result of electric vehicles.
I was chatting actually specifically about electric vehicles in Canada with someone earlier, and this person was saying, well, actually, they don't really work at minus 30 Celsius, so it's not quite feasible for Canada. So is that an issue, for example, something the specificities of your country?
Well, there's no, I mean, listen, again, I think I started with change is not going to be easy. And we have to have, there's not one size fits all, there's not one solution. So, another area that we're very active in at Invest in Canada is in the hydrogen, what is transpiring in terms of hydrogen facilities development. But also in BC, we have Cellcentric, who's working to do a hydrogen fuel cell for long haul trucking, because electric vehicles may not be the solution for that. So I think once you establish a marker that we need to reduce our carbon footprint, we need to have new solutions, those innovators, those scientists, those companies that have been working on products and ideation for a long period of time are able to bring some of that out into the world and test it. And that's the exciting thing I think there's going to be lots of different solutions. So are there going to be different solutions for cold climates? Probably. Maybe it's not invented yet. There's also broad distances in Canada, right? If you think about our geography, if someone in a smaller, geographic part of the world is worried about range anxiety, if you've driven the routes in Northern Ontario across Canada, you'd have a lot of range anxiety with respect to when you were going to be able to plug in your vehicle. But, we have a lot of great scientists around the world and in Canada as well, who are working on tackling the range issues of batteries to have a new solution for that exact issue. So I really think there's a lot of smart minds working on these things to help us find the solutions. And that's why industry has to be part of this, because government is not in a lab trying to figure out how do we tackle this issue. It's our scientists and our innovators that are doing that.
What about the companies interested in investing in fossil fuels, in the fossil fuel industry? Because I believe, at least based on official 2020 data, 1 in 5 FDI projects in Canada was related to the fossil fuel industry.
So I would say, I think what we are seeing and where I went to is that industry is recognizing it needs to be part of the transformation. And, we've gone a long way from an industry that didn't see they needed to roll up their sleeves and find solutions to where we are today, to abatement, to carbon capture and storage, to the Pathways Group, to what's happening in Alberta, building out a new industry. So I think they both see their role, and as we do, see the role as a part of transition, because we talked about change being hard. This change would be much, much harder for society if we said, you have to stop this, and there's no solution, there's no alternative to it. So we do need to build those solutions, and there's going to be a time of transition. So in terms of the work that we do at Invest in Canada, and in Canada, we're really moving to every lens that we put on the investment that we are attracting to Canada is a sustainable one. There is nothing that we are doing that is the old way of doing things. Everything is sustainable. So when we're talking about hydrogen, when we're talking about electric vehicles, alt proteins, life sciences, the fields that we work on to bring companies to Canada, we are analyzing and looking at what is the sustainability lens of that. What is the Indigenous reconciliation lens of that? So that is the piece. So we are actively engaged in those areas that are driving sustainable change.
So as long as, I guess, and this is a wider subject, not necessarily related to Canada, but as long as, I guess, fossil fuels remain highly profitable, then perhaps there isn't such a strong incentive in supporting the development of all the technology and the infrastructure needed for the alternatives. Would you agree with that? Is that why we haven't really made that switch? And if not, why?
I mean, that's not, speaking of, that's not the perspective that I see in Canada. Listen, I grew up in Western Canada, understand that industry, have seen the change in that industry, know that, we have significant activity happening in Canada with respect to the creation of hydrogen as an export product to respond to the needs for energy in Germany, as an example. So I really do think that there is change, and a key part of it has been putting a price on carbon, right? Recognizing that externality factor that this does have a price. So always needing to find the right balance, and those in roles in government need to find the right balance between sustainability and affordability, right? That's something that we need to continue to well, I don't need to, they do need to, but I think it is important from a perspective of society to keep those who want to see the change happen to be able to continue to live their lives. So that's why the involvement of businesses who are all here today, and the fact that this conference has such a significant sustainability lens and a strong tie between economy and environment are critical. Because years ago, we used to say it was economy or environment. It cannot be that. We have to find a path to economy and environment. And those CEOs that I get to talk to every day around the world who are looking and have chosen Canada, whether it's Belgium's Umicore or Northvolt, as we talked about, or LG Stellantis and others who are choosing Canada to be their home for what they're going to do to be part of this transformation that we need to make in society. They are doing it to drive that change and to respond to a need in the market. So now we need our consumers and our shareholders of those companies on board as well. So that's why it's really critical that industry be part of the solution.
And very last question. So you're saying you're hopeful that good things will come out of COP. What would be the one thing that you think is really important and pivotal to make the transition happen fast enough?
I think there's some really interesting things happening in terms of, battery passports in Europe. And so I think there's key things happening when I think hopefully there'll be a lot of focus on COP this year, and that we can talk about it in a way that is understandable to people, explain what's taking place. And I think if I can give one thing that I believe helps change, shining the light and transparency and disclosures are important, because consumers, boards, shareholders, they can't make decisions if they don't have the intelligence, if they don't have the data to make those decisions. And so I think that that's really been a big transformation that we've seen in society over the decade, or more, that I've been in and around public life and other things, that is critical. People need the information to make decisions. Make good decisions when you have good information. You make bad decisions if you don't have the right information.
Some mandatory disclosures, I would imagine you're calling for. All right. So thank you so much, Laura. So we touched on a lot. The feeling is still hopeful, which is good to see, particularly because I feel like we all can slip into cynicism when it comes to these things, and lots of work is needed in terms of policy regulation, but also obviously capital, be it public or private. So let's hope that this can happen very soon. Thank you again so much, Laurel.
Great, thank you.